It was a shock to hear the stores that housed my childhood dreams were closing down. For me, the jingle that played in the Toys R Us ads every Christmas season was what signified the start of the holidays. It was a shame to see these stores reduced to a recreation of a constant Black Friday sale due to the liquidation prices. A rush of adults, either fishing for cheap treats for their little ones, or people hoping to get one last shot of nostalgia before they were gone for good. I was one of the latter shoppers. I picked up a cheap little set of Pokemon figurines. Useless, but in the hype, I felt compelled to get something as memorabilia. Slowly, they all started closing their doors for good. When I travelled to the city, it was weird seeing the remaining husks that used to be so colourful. I'd occasionally drive past my town's big shopping complex and see the abandoned toy stores there too. Eventually, the hype of the situation died down and life returned to normal. It was out of the tips of people's tongues, and the last of the stores that remained open for as long as possible fell in silence. It was sad to see them finally gone. Or so I thought. I figured they all closed in staggered intervals, the least profitable stores closing the soonest, and the most profitable used to liquidate as much stock as possible. There was one Toys R Us that sat in a smaller shopping district in the outskirts of my town that had its lights on very late into the administration process. At first, I silently cheered it on, hoping it would be the last to go. However, as time went on, this jeer turned into a strange feeling of betrayal. They had no bailout or a buyer, so eventually all the stores should have closed down. So it confused me as to why this one never shut down. I started feeling manipulated, thinking the company had feigned closing down to drive more sales, only to keep their most profitable stores open and feed off that nostalgia in the death throes of their brand. A shady business practice in my eyes. This idea fell flat when I brought it up to my friends in passing, and they all looked at me funny and mocked me for suggesting they were still open. A little insulted, when home, I decided to go online to back my findings up before confronting them again to save face for what I thought was their blunder. I googled the official website, and what I found left me with much more questions than it did answers. The website clearly stated that all stores officially closed as of April 28th, 2018. All stores. All. Now, I had an anomaly in my head. If all the stores were officially closed, then how was I driving past a perfectly open Toys R Us every so often in my town? This drove my curiosity to all new levels. I decided to scope it out a bit more when I passed it, rather than the quick glance I gave it if traffic happened to stop. In my head, I theorized many ideas for both arguments. Maybe it was a knockoff store, like how you get Pizza Hat that tries to emulate Pizza Hut style, intentionally misspelled in a minor way to avoid a lawsuit. Or maybe I coincidentally lived in the town where Toys R Us started, and the original store stood separate from the franchises that fell. I pulled over at a distance and immediately chastised myself for thinking this one stayed open because it was profitable. No other store in the complex was open either, most likely the larger complex forcing stores here to move or close. The lights were on and it looked to be open. I stared at the sign, studying it for any kind of discrepancy. Though the sign looked perfectly legitimate, the spelling on point and the colours looking accurate, something felt off about it. Nothing visual, however, I had a strange unease when staring at the sign. possibly unset by its anomalous existence. My small belief of it being a bootleg store being shattered in my stillness. I stared a little further, inspecting what I could through the window from the far distance I was parked. From what I could see, it was stocked with toys, all displayed in a manner that looked like it was kept up to date. The items I could see were all name brand, each finding adding to my curiosity and my confusion. I originally didn't plan on going inside as it was late. However, by this point, I was overwhelmed by a desire to answer some of the many questions that piled in my mind. I waddled my way over, hesitation coursing through every step I took. I slowly tried the doors, which gave way, signifying that it was open. Walking the aisles, there was an air of stillness. Though the shelves were stocked full and looked amazingly managed, they appeared untouched. There were no other footsteps in the building, and everything gave a chilling feeling of emptiness. It was this emptiness that reinforced to me that this was why Toys R Us closed down, the dwindling shopping base they had all but disappearing. The scene I was in was a perfect analogy of the death of the franchise. With that conclusion, I left, feeling content at my adventure, and because of that, I eventually stopped caring. Many months later, something new was consuming my thoughts. The release of the newest Super Smash Bros. Game, set to release on the 7th of December 2018, a game series I long since kept up with. The problem was that I knew others felt the same way about this game series. This meant it would be sold out immediately in my town, as my town had a scarce amount of game stores. Limited shops meant limited supplies, and limited supplies meant scalpers were rampant in my area. Sure, I could have bought it from the eShop. However, it always seemed to cost more there, and I persistently collected physicals of all my games. I liked having something to show for my hard-earned money. It was when I was trying to think of a solution that the strange Toys R Us I found popped into my mind. It was always stocked, yet people never thought to look for it. From my drives, I would still see it open, so in my head, I felt there was a chance. I could try for a midnight release at my local game store and risk being beaten by the many others with the same idea, or I could chance it at the Toys R Us the next day. Out of sheer curiosity, I decided to go with the latter. The worst case scenario, I would have a story to tell. The awaited day came, and I made my way casually to the store. Though I expected it at this point, I was still pleasantly surprised to see it was open and accessible. They even had displays advertising the release of Smash, showing that somehow the store was kept up. In the front of the store was a full shelf of the game. I picked one up, and to my surprise, it was shrink-wrapped, indicating that the game was already inside. Usually, stores that sold games never did this in order to prevent shoplifting. Most stores had dummies or displayed the empty cases. I made my way to the register and waited, case in hand. I waited, and I waited, and I waited. I nervously looked around. However, I soon picked up that no one was coming to my aid. A small thought shot through the back of my head. It would be so easy to walk out with the game. Some darker parts of my head justified it as their fault for not serving me, their customer, which they should be catering for. However, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Some part of me already feeling guilty for even contemplating the idea of stealing a full-priced new release game. I leant over, grabbed the scanner, and scanned the box. The price showed up to what I expected for a brand new game. I roughly knew how to operate the till from a bit of experience and from watching other cashiers. I got the card machine to work, paid, then left. I was nervous, so I walked fast, feeling weird for doing all that, even though I felt what I did was legit. In fact, I left so fast, I'd forgotten to take a selfie of myself with the game in front of a fully functioning Toys R Us, something I felt people would have went crazy over online. I got home, and a new worry came over me. Whether the game would work. I now had a new anxiety swimming through me, that the place was somehow a prank or a scam. It all seemed too good to be true, and getting the money for a full-price game was not an easy thing for me at my age. I hesitantly popped it into my Nintendo Switch, and all my anxiety washed away when I saw the game working perfectly. I was so excited and actually managing to play a big release game so close to the release date without having to camp outside the game store or pay a scalper an extortionate amount. It wasn't long until I was getting bombarded by messages from friends who saw me online somehow playing Smash. They were all asking how I got the game. In reality, put forward more colourfully like, "Who'd you suck off to get that?" All of which I ignored. When I did answer, I'd just say, "Toys R Us," which they'd heckle me for, taking it as a joke. I laughed inside, knowing that they rejected the answer right in front of their face. I did plan on telling them properly at some point, but later, I thought. For now, it was time for Smash. It didn't take long the next day for the banter to turn into genuine anger and even loathsome jealousy. My friends were getting frustrated that they couldn't play the game, and I empathized at this, knowing the pain myself from past experiences with it. I decided to invite them around and tell them of my amazing secret in person. I felt it would be much easier to explain in person so they could see I was serious. After a good night of playing Smash, destroying everyone with my Ridley, knowing I had the most experience with a brand new character, I got to explaining my adventure. I told them everything, which they shot back with a mix of reactions. Some were disbelieving. Understandable, as it did sound like a tall tale. Others didn't feel comfortable at the idea, picking up on the unsettling vibes I felt about the place. However, one friend, Brian, was ecstatic. When the evening calmed down, he expressed interest in going himself. At first, I was excited that someone else was going to relish in the secret with me. However, as a precaution, I told him to be careful. This wasn't because of its remote location or any kind of external danger, but rather a possible issue with Brian. Out of all the friend group, he came from the more outgoing side of school. Though he liked nerdy things like the rest of our friends, he would also hang out with the kind of kids that got in trouble all around town. I loved having him around, but we knew the trouble he could bring up. My biggest fear was that he'd take advantage of the good nature of the store. He reacted that he picked up on my hint of warning and went on his way. Eventually, I was sat down, satisfied with how the evening went, when suddenly, my phone lit up. I started getting live messages from Brian. He sent messages of pictures of his journey. I recognized all the streets he posted and read about how excited he was. I was happy for him. He was probably the most enthusiastic about Smash out of the rest of us. Then I got one big update. It was a string of all caps messages about his surprise of actually seeing the Toys R Us open. His reaction could be likened to that of a kid that didn't believe in Santa, only to see him living and breathing, leaving presents on Christmas Eve. A low expectation shattered by an unbelievable reality. I interrupted his excitement with a probing question. I asked him how he was going to pay for it. I knew he was bad with money, and I asked it in such a way that didn't give him wiggle room to talk out of it. He didn't even try lie. He just replied that he wasn't. I was furious. Not only did I feel bad that he was going to take advantage of the store's open ethics, but I felt he was taking advantage of mine too. I also felt that a store that operated like that would have good security, so I tried to talk him out of it, to no avail. He was adamant on getting Smash, and he was adamant on getting it for free. He even got mad at my pressure, trying to deflect my concern that this was his choice and that I wouldn't get in trouble, so there shouldn't be a problem. Then he threw a victim-blaming response that it was their fault for leaving the store so open. I stopped messaging after that, feeling done with him at that point. The last message I got was a selfie of Brian holding a sealed copy of Smash outside of the store, followed by a text saying he was coming over to play more with me. I simply told him I didn't want any of this to be tracked back to me and told him to not come over. That was sort of a lie. I just didn't want to face him. Trying to take my mind off things, I just went back on Smash and tried to wash the salty taste out of my mouth with some playtime. The whole time concerned, he just ruined something great I found. After a few days, my friends were still without Smash. At this point, they said they were probably getting it for Christmas when the restocks were in. It was actually kind of sad knowing I was getting bored of it already, when all my friends were probably going to get a more fun social experience when they all played together. It felt like a cursed wish. I got the game I wanted, but no one to share it with. This made me remember Brian, and even though I was upset, I was curious of how he was doing with it. I texted him, to which I got no response. Brian was always hard to get a hold of at times. Then I started to think he was mad at me for being such a prude, so I tried to call, which the line died straight away, the sign that his phone was off. Brian was also terrible at charging his phone. I figured a game shouldn't come between a friendship, and that his personal moral decisions are his own to make. I packed up my Switch and controller and headed to his house, ready to reconcile over our shared love of the game. I got to the beaten-up door to his house, remnants of arguments with his mother splintered across the wood. I knocked a few times and patiently waited. Just as my patience was wearing thin, I heard the shuffles of slippers hastily scratching towards the door. I was taken back when the door swung open at a speed I wasn't expecting. Up in my face was a haggard-looking lady, almost unrecognizable as Brian's mother. She straight away exclaimed her son's name, before settling down, seeing it was only me, a look of dismay accompanying it. I knew it was futile, but to indirectly approach the subject, I asked if Brian was in. She said no, but knew I wanted answers, so she invited me inside, seeming happy for the company. Over a cup of tea, she explained that a few days ago, Brian came home in a panic. He was acting paranoid, looking around over his shoulder, despite being in his own house. He was constantly checking the windows, whilst also making sure all the curtains were drawn. One by one, he broke all the light bulbs after yelling at his mother too many times to keep the lights off. She was concerned, but whenever she'd pry, he'd snap at her every time, She simply did as he said, feeling he'd gotten into trouble with the wrong people again. Throughout the days he was home, she'd find him acting strange. He'd be huddled in a ball, shaking, muttering to himself strange lines, sometimes humming a familiar old commercial jingle, something from his childhood, she said. She figured it was a comfort thing. She tried to comfort him, however nothing was ever working. She'd be kept up by his screams through the night. She'd find him in paranoid rushes of strange behavior. This is why it was a shock when one night she had a full night's sleep. When she awoke, she realized Brian was nowhere to be found. I comforted her through her telling and gave her my deepest sympathies. I left, giving her a half-hearted promise to do what I could, and exited her house. I only had one idea: to go to the store. On my journey, my mind was spinning with possible ideas of what could have happened. Theories that the security found Brian's criminal record that he'd kept from his mother, and it was the last straw before he had to face hard jail time. Or maybe he bumped into some old friends that weren't happy that he stopped hanging out with them, or more accurately, stopped dealing for them. Ideas like these swam in my head until I pulled up to the store, and at the presence of the anomalous structure, my mind felt blank. I peered inside, still seeing it was open. Part of me was relieved to see it still up and running. There were new displays at the front, ready for Christmas. Some new toy I hadn't heard of. It looked a bit too young of a demographic for me. The stand with the copies of Smash was still there, with a few picked away. One notable empty spot on the top left, where I'd picked out the copy I bought. Against my pessimism, I entered, hoping to find someone to question about the whereabouts of Brian. I had low hopes that anyone was in there, considering how the first few visits went. However, because of this expectation, I was taken back when I saw another figure in the store with me. A clean-cut individual at the far end of the shop. He was wearing a security uniform, though he was standing in a terrible place if he wanted to actually catch any kind of shoplifters. As I approached, I slowed, instead choosing to study him rather than rush into conversation. He wasn't focusing on me at all, just blankly staring ahead in a hapless daze. His smile feeling odd, as when I studied his line of sight, there wasn't anything to be smiling about, just the corner of a plain shelf. He was displayed like the very products they sold here, a figurine propped up to look like a person. His hair was swept almost too cleanly to the side, not a single strand out of place. His face looked clean and smooth, looking like he was using makeup. If he was at my school and caught a bully's attention, he'd definitely be compared to the default Lego man model. Maybe it was because of this that I didn't recognize that it was actually Brian. When I had my head-slapping realization, I called out to him in a jovial tone, feeling stupid for thinking he was in trouble. I wondered if he was embarrassed about cleaning up like this. I carried on, asking what he was doing. He replied with, "Hello, sir. How may I help you?" Sir? May? These words felt weird coming from his mouth, though I quickly changed my feelings to that of feelings of pride of his change, wanting to come in with a supportive tone. I carried on, telling him his mother was worried about him and that he should come home. I went on to try offer to mediate if he needed, in case they were arguing again. However, I was cut off when he said, "Hello, sir. How may I help you?" I froze this time, taken back by how eerily similar he'd said that to his previous iteration. I looked at him some more and realized he was still blankly staring ahead. He hadn't even acknowledged my existence, besides his robotic dialogue. "If this is a joke, it's not funny. I'm sorry for making you feel bad the other day, but this has gone too far. Seriously, I'm taking you home," I sputtered out in a serious tone I didn't know I could make. At this, his demeanor changed. Though his mouth was still cemented up into an infallible smile, his eyes told a different story. The windows to his feelings. They were glossed over, looking like they wanted to water. However, something strong within him was holding his feelings back. This force carried through his body as his neck twitched slightly, and his tone had changed to a feeling of struggle and spat out a different line. "Sorry, I have to attend to something around back. Please feel free to browse our store." As he finished saying this, he left. I could tell there was a dichotomy in his head that was trying to tear him in two different directions. This has been going on for about a week now, and I don't know what to do. I've been going in the store every day, and it's the same thing. He'll just offer help in a polite, yet robotic customer service way. However, if I push things a few times, he'd just excuse himself and go to the back where I can't get to him. Sometimes he'll wear the dead fish-eyed look, and sometimes I'll see a twinge of resistance, but only for a fleeting moment. I've tried calling the police, to no avail. They report to me that he's fine where he is and can't do anything without his consent. Apparently he tells them it's his choice to be there. They always comment how polite he is, something which to them is a plus, but to me is a tell on how not himself he is. The only person I haven't told is his mother. I don't know how she'd take it if she finds out, and I'm even more scared of what she'd do. What's worse is during my visits to check up on Brian to see how he's doing and check if there's any sign of saving him, I've started noticing something bad. Every so often, I'll see a new staff member, a sweeper here, a shelf stocker there. Each of them reply like they're stuck in a trance, robotically repeating friendly customer service remarks. I'm terrified at the implication of all this.